I'm going to challenge you guys on one thing, and Allie, I don't know if you know this. Last July, I was traveled all across the country last year. I was getting really stressed and just worn down, typical stuff that happens on the road. And a pastor friend of mine said, Charlie, you got to take a Sabbath. And I was like, oh, we're not bound by that commandment, whatever. And he really convicted me. So every Friday night, I take a Jewish Sabbath, turn off my phone Friday night to Saturday night. The world cannot reach me, and I get nothing from the world. It will bless you infinitely.
Many people today believe that as soon as the last apostle died, the entire Christian world started worshiping on Sunday to honor the resurrection. But is that what the historical record actually shows? For the first few centuries after Christ, the Sabbath wasn't a Jewish practice. We have compelling evidence that Christians all across the Roman Empire continued to honor the 7-day Sabbath just as Jesus did. Let's look at the map. In places like Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, where the Apostle Paul and John spent so much time, Sabbath keeping was widespread among Christians. The same was true in Syria and across much of North Africa. These weren't isolated pockets of believers. These were vibrant, growing centers of early Christianity, and for them, the Sabbath was still a sacred day of rest and worship, a continuation of the faith they had received directly from the apostles. But you don't have to take my word for it. Let's look at what the historians of that time had to say. Two of the most prominent church historians of the first few centuries were Socrates Scholasticus and Josephus. They weren't writing to prove a point about the Sabbath. They were simply documenting the practice of the Christian world as they saw it. And what did they see? Both historians noted that in their time, many years after Christ, almost all Christian churches throughout the world celebrated on Sabbath. Socrates Scholasticus wrote, "For although almost all churches throughout the world celebrate the sacred mysteries on the Sabbath of every week, yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this." Did you catch that? Almost all churches throughout the world. The exceptions, Rome and Alexandria. Josephus also wrote, "There's not any city of the Grecians, nor any of the barbarians, nor any nation whatsoever, whither our custom of resting on the 7th day had not come." This is a stunning admission from mainstream historians of the era. The historical record is clear. For centuries, Sabbath keeping wasn't the exception. It was the norm for the vast majority of Christians. The shift to Sunday-only observance was, at that point, largely a local custom in Rome and Alexandria, not a universal practice. So the questions we have to ask is why? Why did the churches in Rome and Alexandria abandon the Sabbath? And how did their local custom eventually become the dominant practice for most Christians? To answer that, we have to look at the powerful culture and political forces that were beginning to reshape the Roman Empire. After the devastating Jewish revolts of 66 to 70 AD, and again in 132 to 135 AD, Rome cracked down heavily on Jewish practices. Early Christians found themselves in a difficult position. To the Romans, they often looked like just another Jewish sect. To protect themselves and make their faith more accessible to their pagan neighbors, some Christians began to strategically distance themselves from Jewish practices, and the most obvious Jewish practice, the 7-day Sabbath. This didn't happen overnight. There was no memo sent out declaring we're switching days. Instead, in major centers like Rome and Alexandria, some Christians began gathering on Sunday, the first day of the week. Why Sunday? They did it to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, which had happened on that day. But at first, for many, this was an additional day of gathering. They still recognized the 7-day Sabbath and then met again on Sunday. It was a both-and situation. This is why in history we find statements coming from that region as the one from Justin Martyr, who wrote, "And on the day called that of the sun, all who live in cities or in the country gathered together to one place," and the memoirs of the apostles. And over time, as the pressure to separate from Judaism grew, the focus slowly shifted. The extra meeting day began to take on more importance. It was a gradual drift away from a biblical command and toward a man-made tradition. This culture shift set the stage for the single most significant political event in history of this debate. Fast forward to the year 321 AD. The Roman Empire is now under the command of Emperor Constantine. His empire was vast, fractured, and filled with diverse peoples and religions. He needed a way to unify them all. He saw that unity in a new rising force, Christianity. But Constantine himself had long been a devotee of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. The most popular pagan cult in the empire worshipped the sun, and their sacred day was, you guessed it, the venerable day of the sun, Sunday. Constantine saw a political opportunity. In 321 AD, he issued a landmark decree. It was the first ever Sunday law. Here's what it said. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. Notice the language. He doesn't call it the Sabbath, he doesn't call it the Lord's Day or a Christian day of worship. He uses the pagan title, the venerable day of the sun. This was a brilliant political move. With one decree, he pleased the pagans who already revered Sunday. And he pleased the growing number of Christians in cities like Rome who had already adopted Sunday as a day of fellowship. He created common ground, a shared day of rest for the entire empire. But in doing so, he changed everything. For the first time in history, a human law enforced rest on Sunday. A tradition that began as a way to avoid persecution was now backed by the full power of the Roman state. The preference of some had become the law of the land. The foundation had been laid. The authority of God's unchanging law was being subtly replaced by the authority of man. And this political turning point would pave the way for a religious institution to later claim it had the power to change God's own times and laws.